In the world of finance, trust is currency. And no one understood that better than Bernie Madoff, a man who mastered the art of appearing legitimate, respectable, and even admirable, while quietly constructing the largest Ponzi scheme in modern history. For decades, Madoff presented himself as a pioneer of Wall Street, a genius investor, a mentor to regulators, and a philanthropist adored by the elite. But beneath all of that, prestige was a financial illusion worth an impossible $65 billion. This is the story of how Bernie Madoff built the greatest lie in the history of American finance, and how he kept it alive for over 40 years. To understand the scale of Madoff's deception, you first have to understand who he was before the scandal broke. Bernie Madoff wasn't some outsider scamming rich people from a basement. He was the establishment. In the 1,960 seconds, he founded Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities with just $5,000 earned from lifeguarding and sprinkler installation. It wasn't glamorous, but Madoff had an advantage: ambition. He entered Wall Street at a moment when technology was starting to reshape markets, and he used that momentum to reinvent himself. He became one of the early adopters of electronic trading, helping build the very systems that major exchanges use to this day. At one point, his firm was responsible for as much as 5% of all daily stock trading in the United States. By the 1,980 seconds, Bernie Madoff was not just a successful trader. He was a respected architect of the modern financial world. He advised regulators. He testified in Washington. He was on the board of the NASDAQ and even served as its chairman. He had access, power, and influence, and he used all of that credibility as a shield to protect a secret he could never reveal. Because at the same time that Madoff built a legitimate, impressive trading business, he also built something else. A separate, hidden investment advisory arm operating on a different floor of his office. This secret division was the engine of the Ponzi scheme. It was closed off from the rest of the company, staffed by only a handful of hand-picked employees, and guarded by a level of secrecy that should have alarmed anyone paying attention. But almost no one questioned it. Why would they? This was Bernie Madoff, the golden boy of Wall Street. The way the scheme worked seemed simple on the surface. Investors would give money to Madoff, believing he invested it using a strategy he called split-strike conversion, a technique involving stocks and options designed to produce steady, reliable returns. The key word was steady. No matter what the market did, boomed, crashed, stagnated, Madoff's fund seemed to deliver consistent profits, usually around 10 to 12% annually. Not too high, not too low. Just perfect enough to seem convincing. But there was one problem. There were no trades. No strategy, no stocks, no options, nothing. The entire investment operation was pure fiction. When clients sent money, Madoff didn't invest it. He deposited it into a bank account. When someone wanted to withdraw their profits, he simply took money from newer investors and handed it to them. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, just executed on a scale no one had ever imagined. The statements mailed to investors were fabricated using outdated printers. The trade confirmations were fake. The returns were made up. And the genius of the lie was that the numbers were consistent, controlled, and believable. Madoff understood human psychology. People distrust something that makes them too much money. But steady returns? That's comforting. That feels safe. Madoff also knew how to build exclusivity. Many investors actually begged to get into his fund, and he often turned them away on purpose. That made access feel like a privilege, something special, something earned. Wealthy individuals, charities, celebrities, foundations, and even major banks spread the word. Bernie Madoff was the man who could generate stable, predictable returns regardless of market conditions. And that reputation snowballed. It brought in billions. But the illusion wasn't maintained by Madoff alone. Certain employees inside the secretive division were instructed to create phony documents, backdate trades, and manipulate spreadsheets to produce whatever results Madoff needed. They were not traders, they were production workers manufacturing a fantasy. Some knew exactly what was happening. Others suspected. But everyone understood one thing. Bernie was the boss, and questioning him wasn't an option. The question many people ask is, how did he get away with it for so long? The answer is a perfect storm of credibility, fear, and regulatory failure. Madoff's reputation intimidated critics. Regulators relied on his expertise instead of investigating it. Even when whistleblowers presented detailed mathematical evidence proving the returns were impossible, the investigations barely scratched the surface. The audit firms examining his books were tiny operations, incapable of verifying billions of dollars. And Madoff's social circle, built on charity galas, country clubs, and personal relationships, acted as a protective bubble that shielded him from scrutiny. But the most powerful force protecting Madoff wasn't regulators or employees. It was his own investors. They didn't want to believe anything was wrong, because they weren't just trusting him, they were benefiting from him. When someone receives steady profits for years, they stop asking questions. They become loyal. They become dependent. And that dependence became the lifeblood of the scheme. Madoff's clients ranged from the ultra-rich to everyday retirees. Many had entrusted him with their entire life savings. Some withdrew just enough to live comfortably, believing the remaining balance was growing safely in the background. Others reinvested their profits year after year, watching their account statements balloon. Charities, universities, and nonprofits relied on the returns to fund their programs. Through his carefully managed illusion of trust, Madoff became a financial institution unto himself, a one-man bank quietly holding billions of dollars from thousands of people. But no Ponzi scheme can last forever. They all depend on one thing: new money. As long as more cash comes in than goes out, the illusion holds. But if too many investors demand withdrawals at the same time, the whole structure collapses instantly. And in 2008, that collapse arrived. The global financial crisis triggered panic everywhere. Markets plunged, banks failed, investors rushed to pull their money out of any fund they could. Even those who trusted Madoff completely wanted to withdraw cash just to feel safe. But Madoff didn't have their money. He had never invested it. Decades of fictional returns had created massive fake balances. In reality, he had only a fraction of what clients believed he held. The outflows overwhelmed him, requests piled up, and for the first time in years, Bernie Madoff, the man who always had an answer, always had a plan, ran out of options. On December 10th, 2008, Madoff confessed to his sons that the entire operation was a fraud. They reported him. And the next day, the FBI walked into his apartment. When asked why the investment advisory business wasn't making trades, Madoff simply replied, "There is no innocent explanation." He was arrested on the spot. The aftermath was catastrophic. Investors discovered their life savings were gone. Nonprofits shut down. Pension funds collapsed. Families who trusted Madoff for generations learned that the wealth they believed they had never actually existed. The total value of the fraud, $65 billion, was based mostly on imaginary profits printed on paper. The real money lost was closer to $18 billion, but even that number was unprecedented. The fallout didn't end with Madoff. Lawsuits spread through the financial world. Feeder funds that funneled billions into Madoff's scheme were accused of negligence. Major banks faced lawsuits for ignoring red flags. Regulators were humiliated. And Madoff's own family fractured under the weight of the scandal. In 2009, Bernie Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in prison. For many victims, it was symbolic justice. For others, it was irrelevant, their lives had already been destroyed. Madoff never expressed true remorse. Even in prison, he portrayed himself not as a criminal mastermind, but as a victim of circumstance, claiming the financial crisis forced his hand. But the truth is simple. The fraud began long before the crisis. It was not a desperate decision. It was a deliberate system of deception that lasted for decades. So how did this happen? How did one man fool regulators, financial institutions, and thousands of intelligent investors for nearly half a century? It comes down to something deeper than strategy or numbers. Bernie Madoff understood human behavior. He knew people trust confidence, they trust consistency, they trust status, and they trust what everyone else trusts. The psychology of crowds became his greatest weapon. He didn't need to outsmart the market, he only needed to outsmart the people participating in it. The Madoff scandal exposed a painful truth about finance. Even the most sophisticated systems in the world rely on belief. The belief that institutions are honest, that numbers reflect reality, and that experts know what they're doing. When that belief is manipulated, the consequences are catastrophic. Bernie Madoff didn't just steal money. He stole trust. And once trust is broken on such a massive scale, it takes years, sometimes decades, to rebuild. But the story of Madoff also forced the financial world to change. It reshaped how regulators investigate fraud, how banks vet investments, and how investors perceive trust. The SEC revamped its auditing standards. Banks became more cautious, wealth managers demanded transparency, and financial education for ordinary people began to gain traction, emphasizing skepticism and critical thinking over blind faith. Even today, the shadow of Madoff's scheme lingers. It serves as a warning of what can happen when ambition, secrecy, and human greed intersect. Every Ponzi scheme since has been measured against the benchmark he set. Every investor who blindly trusts a guaranteed return now hears echoes of the Madoff scandal. And every financial professional understands that credibility, while powerful, can be weaponized for destruction. Bernie Madoff built an empire on charm, credibility, and the illusion of stability. But in the end, all illusions crumble, the truth catches up, and the lies, no matter how big, fall apart. This is the legacy of Bernie Madoff, a $65 billion illusion that changed the financial world forever. A cautionary tale that reminds us that in finance, as in life, trust is precious and dangerous when placed in the wrong hands.